I told Angelo I've read his most recent book, which you may have seen here, and I placed him in the chapter of another book that will be published this summer called Ennobling Encounters. That's the manuscript. I sent it off to the publisher yesterday. And he is listed with one of the 10. He is one of the 10 greats of the conservative movement.
Poor movement. Can't believe it.
But at any rate, I say nice things about you.
Thank you.
The other thing is, this is a book that I published in 2015. I hate the term conservative movement because we're not an ideology. We're a community of believers in certain principles. And so one of the things I want to talk to you today about is the loss of that belief system. The character of the American nation has changed.
Yeah.
And why? And what are the consequences of that? So,
shall we start?
Hmm?
Shall we start?
Well, yeah, but I want to introduce Dr. Mannion here.
Okay.
And also mention that the three of us were at Notre Dame. So it was sort of a reunion. And Dr. Mannion is a political theorist who's devoted much of his work to documenting the decline of the Catholic Church and the role of Catholic bishops in that decline. So if the character of the nation has changed, it's possible that we've also lost the great overarching belief in Christianity. And I hope that Dr. Mannion will talk about that. But in the other book that, this book that Angelo has written, To Make and Keep Peace, he documents the transformation of American foreign policy, basically from Woodrow Wilson on, and mentioned some great names. Josiah Strong in 1885 wrote a book that sort of explained why our duty was to take care of the world. Albert Beveridge, a Republican senator from Indiana. Teddy Roosevelt himself, Walt Whitman, Nicholas Murray Butler, David Starr Jordan, Woodrow Wilson, Elihu Root, and Andrew Carnegie. They were the people who moved us in this world in which we've been around since you and I, all of us, were born, where our purpose is not only to keep the peace and to preserve the American nation, but to make the world democratic. And so, what are the consequences of that? I think I would like each of us, particularly starting with Angelo, to talk about the growth of the administrative state, and if that's had is one of the reasons that we're in the condition that we're in. Because Angelo mentions in his book, To Make and Keep Peace, that the United States has been transformed into an imperial power. In other words, the constitution of limited government doesn't exist anymore. We're governed by an administrative state of agencies of government, non-elected experts who basically tell us what to do or not. And that's come out quite openly recently with respect to the coronavirus, because now we're being told to wear masks. Today I went out to buy a bottle of wine to make some cocoa man, and I put my mask on. I'm walking through this food line or something, a grocery store with a mask on. And I put it on because I live in Virginia. Whenever I go outside, I have to wear a mask. And this is because, I think if my father in the World War II generation had heard that, he would have gotten his machine gun out and shot some people. We don't have that alternative opportunity.
In an oligarchy, you have the powerful people in a variety of institutions validating one another. Validation of right comes not from right, not from natural right, or from popular consensus, but from what one might call intra-elite consensus. Ergo, the elite, the consensus among people who believe they know better. Hence the administrative state, and that ends my introduction.
Even 50 plus years ago in business school at Chicago, it's supposed to be a very number-oriented business program in grad school, but we had a sociology professor, and naturally he was lazy, and he had everybody give book reports. And the one I spoke about, and this was a 3-hour once-a-week class, so there were 3 reports. I chose James Burnham's The Managerial State. And it captivated the attention of the class that was a mixture of people in banking, and I think one of the fellows who worked at Playboy was there, Hefner, an associate. But the notion that Burnham stressed that fascinated them was that loyalty was no longer to the firm, but to each other, to the profession into which these people had been advanced, not necessarily by the firm, but by the expertise of one another and those that had gone before them in the realm of expertise. And the sociologists didn't like it, but the Burnham does explain why in the oligarchy, this was 1940, why the oligarchy comprises people both in the government proper and in the various institutions, including the church, because the members of the expertise, and expertise grew between 1870, 1880, and 1920 in the United States, as well as Europe, especially Germany. So these experts came to be the validators of one another, and at the same time, in philanthropy, big money people stopped being in charge of their own money and hired staff, and those staffers from the 1920s forward ran the foundations and passed out the money. It happened to the Catholic Church in the 1930s, and of course, by the time LBJ came around with the Great Society, the experts came in and out from government into the institutions like the NGOs, including the Catholic Church's NGOs, which are secular, but can receive government money. And so their loyalty is to one another. They promote one another, both in terms of propaganda and in terms of position. So I find that notion of loyalty, 50 years ago, I remember people retiring from the bank with a gold watch, where I started right out of Notre Dame. They were going to stay with the company and they were going to be loyal to the company. And the company was loyal to them, and it was. But now, no one can go live at a company that'll be around for 50 years. The company will probably fold. But in the meantime, they will use that stepping stone and key with their peripheral vision to others in their same realm of expertise, to the point where once upon a time here in our little Warren County, the most corrupt and small county in the state, missing 21 and now $30 million that they scratch their heads about, and the woman is still not even wearing an ankle bracelet, but the director of her predecessor and the director of industrial development here, when I asked him, look, 9/11 has created a lot of concern of folks inside the Beltway. They want to move out of the Beltway. You've got to recruit them to get out here with especially their technology businesses, high paying, no diesel fuel in the air. He said, well, I couldn't possibly compete with my professional peers. In Arlington, in Fairfax, in Culpeper, in Norfolk. And this is where we stand with regard to so many of the so-called realms of expertise.
Let me ask, Angelo makes a point in his book, To Make and Keep Peace, that we no longer live in a constitutional republic. It's become an empire. Do you want to talk about that a little, Angelo?
Well, the fact that the ruling class has chosen not to follow the either natural law or the majority of Americans, shows itself in foreign affairs as well as in domestic ones. Who wants empire in America? Go to anywhere in the country, ordinary people, whether they drive trucks or what, whether they be in New York or City or in Omaha, outside of Omaha, Nebraska. They don't want empire. They want babies and barbecue at home. But the very same people who know better concerning foreign affairs, concerning everything really, know that they have a higher duty. And now, where did he get that notion? Did somehow did mankind's genie snuggle up to their ear and tell them, hey, you've got a duty to the rest of mankind? No. They figured that one out all by themselves and said to themselves, you know, the American people who don't want empire, why, they're just a bunch of, well, isolationists. And they're not really worthy of being listened to. And so we are going to we're going to go out and use this great power of the United States of America, and we're going to use it for ends that are beyond those that the ordinary American, that the average American would second. So that's why we have that. It's because it is the same hubris that drives domestic policy. The old Germanic way of understanding foreign policy, foreign affairs, is the Primat des Inneren, the primacy of that which is within. Foreign policy has ever been and will always be a reflection of what the internal state of the country is. Why is it that now you have the anti-Semitism? Why is it now that Joseph Biden decided to weigh in, as Obama did, against Israel? Well, it's because anti-Semitism, dislike of Jews, has become popular within the ruling class. Anti-Semitism is less popular than ever among the American people, but it is more popular than ever within the ruling class. And so you've got the headline of the New York Times, in the New York Times today, is that delegations, not one, but several delegations are being sent from Washington to repair U.S. relations with the Palestinians.
Where's all this heading? I mean, I was just looking up something about the Praetorian Guard. You know, they're talking about stationing troops near the Capitol. Should they be, so that we can protect the building?
Sure. But look, let me just very plainly. None of those troops are ever going to shoot anybody. They're not, and the ruling class is painfully aware of that fact. A lot of this is for show and to cower opposition. Question: will the opposition be cowered? The money question, the practical question is, when will, or in whose body will the leadership of the majority, or at least arguably at least half the country, arise? Right now, there is it's very easy to see a wave of resentment against the ruling class building all over the country. How it can be expressed politically is another story, and I hate to bring in the name Donald Trump, because effectively his person is the main barrier that stands between any number of people who would lead the country, and they're doing so because, well, what would he say and how would he use such influence as he has in their regard? How selfish is he? How does he harbor illusions that the country would elect him? I don't know. What role will he play? That is a practical question, but it is a very important.
Did you watch the events on January 6th?
Oh, yes.
And I found it striking that some of the people in the crowd were very patriotic people. They felt that they were there to protect the nation from collapse.
I also, Chris and I have spent a great deal of time in the Capitol and with the Capitol Police, and we were not surprised to see that many in the Capitol Police were ushering in the demonstrators. That's what they do, you know. They basically cater to tourists, and most of the people who were there acted as tourists.
In 1983, Angelo and I were on the Senate staff in November when Susan Rosenberg blew up the Republican Senate cloakroom, where we were supposed to be sitting with several of the members because Howard Baker said we were going to go in late that night, but he called it off at 5 o'clock. Bomb went off later in the evening, shattered windows, little pocks of scars on the walls are still there, would have killed many people. And the next day there were metal detectors and we had IDs eventually and so on. But we had no troops surrounding the Capitol from Susan Rosenberg and her fellow terrorists. They were eventually apprehended, tried, convicted, and Susan Rosenberg was pardoned by Bill Clinton on his last day in office. And she's now a fundraiser, a senior fundraiser for the Black Lives Matter movement.
Nice to know.
And so in 1983 was also Grenada. And I recall meeting with the Grenadian ambassador by dint of the fact I was staff director for the Western Hemisphere. And a State Department fellow was assigned to the Grenada desk before the invasion. And the State Department fellow was muttering about, well, many people just think that it's a little uneasy about going into Grenada and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, you know, there are a lot of people in the United States that never heard of Grenada. But if Ronald Reagan goes into Grenada, they're going to stand up and cheer because they're patriots. Now, there are a lot of people who know just where Grenada is, and the closer they know its geography, the more reasons they have why we shouldn't go there. Now, this fellow and I, the State Department fellow, never talked to me. He wouldn't even look in my direction. So Mr. Ambassador had to be really diplomatic because I was being myself, the unpromotable, never to be ambassador, typical loose cannon. But I was right. There were patriots in this country and they were anti-communists and the communists were taking over Grenada.
Well, that's right.
That's what else? Next question.
Angelo tells a story of how he was, they attempted to seduce him when he was on the Select Intelligence Committee. They took him to the director's home, showed him how nicely you can live. They saw this guy coming.
Yeah, well, you know, I only remember one line from Albert Speer's memoirs of the Third Reich. Someone asked Speer, who was Hitler's munitions minister, who by all accounts was a decent guy, how could you get mixed up with a guy like that?
Angelo writes about the ostracism of now I've lost it. I'm becoming demented here. You've written about the ostracism of isolationism. In other words, there's not, as Chris has explained, there was a policy. It was described as isolationist, but
no, wait a minute, no. The American people have never ever been isolationists. The American people have always been for America first, which is very, very different. But the ruling class, which has not been for America first, chose to besmirch those who were for America first as isolationists. In other words, by so doing, they foreclosed the question, what shall we do in our own interest? That is always the question. What is the right thing to do? And if you simply say, well, if you don't want to simply preemptively say, yes, we will go and do whatever the hell we want, you are an isolationist. And we won't even give you the honor of arguing with you about any particular move. Look, the basic, listen carefully, the basic tendency of Wilsonians from the very first has been to make enormous commitments, not matched, not only by any actual, but by any potential means of redeeming those commitments. What level of power could possibly have enabled anyone in the world to make the world safe for democracy or for anything else? Impossible. In 1921, the Washington treaties promised, well, not only cut the United States capacity to intervene militarily in the Western Pacific, while at the same time committing the United States to the territorial integrity and independence of China. These things were absolutely incompatible. Now, to oppose such literal bankruptcy is not isolationism. It is simply standing up for the solvency of policy, for not biting off more than you can possibly chew or ought to chew. And it precludes the argument of what ought we to be doing and why. That is always the argument.
Well, the Democrat Party today, various spokesmen for the party, want to get the world involved in helping others. The women in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but primarily what they want to do is help the world involve. I'm sorry, help themselves in domestic politics. That's what it's about. I mean, do not attribute to them any altruism that they haven't got.
What about the Uyghurs?
Well, they may or may not be useful at any given time for domestic politics. Don't kid yourself. Nobody wants.
Well, isn't that cynical, Angelo?
Of course. Of course. Why would you ever have thought of anything else? Entirely so.
One thing I've noticed about leaders in the last 20 years, especially, of course, there was the period from late Reagan, I'd call it 87, to 2000, when we were coasting and throwing away opportunity after opportunity under bad presidents and more. But I noticed among the conservatives of the generation that is now 35 to 45. When George Bush, who was going to have a humble foreign policy and was a reformed alcoholic, and thus I've been a barroom entertainer, and truly reformed alcoholics are wonderful people. They've gone through an awful lot.
Sometimes, however,
And,
they're like George Bush.
Yeah. He, mind you, I give credit where it's due, but he, after 9/11, American so-called conservatives, self-identified from a variety of backgrounds, already confused since 1987 as to where they should hang their hats, were suddenly confronted with big government conservatism and exporting democracy by force if necessary. Pretty much anywhere we chose, the worse the culture and the worse the country, the better. The more corrupt the country, the better. We know that there was more to scrape off the top that way and could never be audited. And indeed, we know now that there was never an audit. My brother-in-law was IG for the Defense Department during the Iraq War. And when I ask him about this, he always turns his attention to something about pornography on a computer in St. Louis at a DOD facility or something. There's an discussion of it, but the conservatives came out of that period shaking their heads. Wait, I know I'm conservative, and here's the three-legged stool, and it just got blown up. And now Pelosi's in charge of the House, and Obama's in the White House. And I think that generation of conservatives, to whom we should now be looking for those leaders, young, tough, but experienced leaders in their 30s and 40s, they're nowhere to be found because they're still reeling from the contradiction of the total lack of cause and effect with regard to principle and policy. And
yeah, you're absolutely right.
Movement.
Absolutely right.
Perhaps we're not going to have a civil war. We're just going to be taken over by some foreign power.
No. No. Lincoln was right. If ruin is to be our lot, we're going to be the author and finisher of it.
Could you repeat that, please?
Lincoln was right. If ruin is to be our lot, we are going to be the authors and finishers of it.
Abraham Lincoln.
It's look, and there is no war that is quite so cruel and significant as civil war. Now, we're in one. The only question is how hot, and how it's going to end up. There's only one thing that is absolutely certain about the war that we're in. It is not going to end up with the restoration of the Republic as it was and founded in 1776-89. What is almost certain is there will be some kind of separation. The alternative to that being just an enervated bunch of people being shepherded about, and most of whom would answer the way that Arlo Guthrie thought that the power should be answered in Alice's Restaurant. The dissenters simply answering all questions with, "You can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant."